Greetings, everyone. Hey, how you doing? It's Matt Sella. Today, we are doing another review for another, Vivian Madrano cartoon called Helluva Boss, the pilot episode, which can be seen on YouTube. I'm joined here with a great friend of mine. He's a talented artist, painter, and, just all-around cool guy. It's Levi Craig. How you doing, Levi?
Doing pretty good, Matt. Pleasure to be here again to talk about this show with you.
Oh, absolutely. And I actually completely forgot that there was another pilot coming out by the same artist team.
Oh, really? I actually forgot about it, too. This one caught me off guard, actually, entirely, until you brought it up.
I know, right? I just saw it in my feed, and I was like, is this another episode? It is. Let's talk about it. But before we begin, why don't you share the world what's up with Levi?
So I'm a watercolor artist. I go around doing the Comic-Con scene, selling my paintings of various pop culture things. You can check me out on Levi Craig Arts.
Sounds good, and we'll have all the links to your awesome work in the description below.
Awesome.
Now, before we begin, as I briefly talked to Levi about this, as well as a few other friends of mine, I am kind of forced to disclose here, while we are talking about an animated cartoon, and we are critiquing and reviewing it, this cartoon itself is not, in fact, targeted for young audiences, clearly.
Right.
It is an adult cartoon, harking back to a lot of the classic cartoons we may have grown up with in the 90s. So please keep that in mind. This review and discussion is purely for adults only. We got that understanding? Good. Let's move on.
That's the part I like about it.
To give you a quick synopsis of Helluva Boss, in hell, imps are the lowest of the low in society. But what happens when one starts an assassin business? This happens. Fellow Blitzo, the O is silent, which I guess I should have done that before, as he attempts to run a startup killing company in a very competitive market, along with his weapon specialist Moxie, his powerhouse Millie, and his receptionist Hellhound Luna. With the help of an ancient book obtained by one of the princes of hell, they manage to make their work possible, and together they attempt to survive each other while trying to keep their business afloat. And that's the general story of this pilot. So I'm going to pass the mic to you, Levi. What are your overall impressions of this pilot episode?
Well, I very much enjoyed it. It caught me off guard seeing another pilot so fast. It was just a month ago that we got HAZBIN Hotel, which I loved. I thought it was a fantastic show, and this was such a pleasure to see, like, a continuation of this world that's being developed by Vivian and her crew. I was really, really interested in seeing where they would go with it. So it's kind of like, to me, it gives me a little bit of an Office Space meets their style, which was really, really interesting. But I wasn't quite so liking the pacing of this one. This one kind of felt like a typical pilot, where they're still throwing ideas around, collaborating, figuring out their own pacing. Felt like the HAZBIN Hotel had a much more complete thought, and this one's still developing. Although I very much enjoyed the characters and how they're all portrayed, and they got an amazing voice actor team, I really am interested in seeing where it goes from here. I'm thrilled to see that it's already getting huge reviews and tons of likes on YouTube, and I'm really stoked to see them create more stuff, because overall, I like how we're seeing more adult cartoons being created. It's very refreshing. It's very interesting seeing how creative people can be with these new concepts that forever have been kind of, taboo almost, because cartoons have been exclusively for kids. So when you've got characters now who are swearing, who are discussing sexual matters, it's a very interesting seeing some of these play on words and stories being developed. And I'm excited to see where a lot of this goes, because I feel like it's changing so much right now, and I'm just really stoked to see where it goes from here.
And for those who saw my previous review of HAZBIN Hotel, know that I was not generally in favor of it, mostly on a fundamental level. However, I will say, in my opinion, with Helluva Boss, I really feel like that this is way more of a realized pilot and actually does a couple things more favorable for me. Like, for example, I really think the palette of the characters and the environment works much more harmoniously than in HAZBIN Hotel. And as Levi mentioned, yes, this is a very stellar voice cast they got here. Nothing against Will Stamper, but they have one of my favorite voice actors of all time, Richard Horvitz, as one of the imp characters.
Yeah, really surprising seeing that. It was really really neat, though.
And even the other cast members were pretty great too. I mean, you were telling me earlier that you actually enjoyed the voice work to come from the Doctor at one point.
Oh yeah, there were so many lines in here that I really just thought stood out amongst the others. The style though changed caught me off guard, but I really enjoyed how the voice acting kind of tied it all together. When they accidentally kill a kid during one of their missions, and then the doctors try and revive the kid to bring him back, it was very entertaining seeing the doctor say, just shout out, just like, we're not going to lose this one." I thought that part was definitely a highlight in this little pilot for me.
I definitely think the acting was stronger in this pilot than it was in HAZBIN Hotel. But I agree with you when you mentioned pacing at one point. Like, trying to think if there was any other positives I have. But to jump to pacing, I did feel like that while this is a more realized pilot, the progression of the overall story felt off for me. I was having this conversation before where there was this one point in the pilot, I don't know if you felt the same way, Levi, but it was a part where Blitz, and I'm remembering the O is silent, was talking about his staff, in particular Luna, the furry hellhound wolf girl, saying like how much of a loose cannon she is or like how reliable she was. And then the story kind of cuts away to a gag or two showing her attitude. And I was like, okay, cool. You kind of show like, yeah, she's not as reliable as he claims, but then it keeps going and going and going. And I feel like it does like maybe like 4 gags in total. Or there was this one particular gag near the end where it actually felt like a new scene, like a new story beat. And at that point I was like, oh, okay, I guess this is the story. That's kind of like what you described, like The Office or some kind of sitcom like that, where it just rolls into something else. But then as soon as that scene ends, we instantly cut back to the conference meeting. And I was like, oh, that didn't feel natural at all. I actually thought we were going elsewhere. So I feel like personally that the story and the pacing of that story is not as well edited as it could have been. And I hate making comparisons all the time, but thinking back of how like Family Guy does its cutaway gags, like whenever the main story of a Family Guy episode makes reference to something and then cuts to a gag, it's usually quick to the point and you kind of get where that character might be coming from at the expense of satire or whatever. But for Helluva Boss, with that particular scene, I felt like it just went on way too long and it actually threw me off guard when we actually got back to the main story.
I agree. I think that's a really good point. That flashback, like I kind of forgot about because it did exceed kind of like your typical, joke and pun kind of format. Like with your comparison to Family Guy, they make it so it's all the pun references only goes for a couple seconds. And in this one, it goes from one pun to another to a completely different story that is also a pun, but it has a lot of layers to it. When you go into the owl demons and Blitz's relationship with them, it's a whole new story. That's all once again referenced right back to how Hellhound is, part of the family. I really enjoyed the idea, but once again, it just didn't communicate very smoothly. Like for a pilot, this is great. I just feel that the pacing they've yet to really figure out. They've got a lot of ideas. I mean, this world that Vivian has created is just so elaborate that I'm just excited to see where they go next with it. Even though I feel like that pun didn't really work, I think even the world is just so immersive that you can almost ignore it. Like this is still an A. I wouldn't say A plus, but it's still an A animated film for me. And I'm really, once again, I'm just overly excited to see where they go with it next. I do have criticisms, but I think that it's exciting to see this kind of idea being pursued and that it's getting a lot of traction online.
Which I'm actually surprised I'm not being butchered for voicing my criticism so far. But I will see how far I could make that stretch, Levi. So other things that kind of worked for me but particularly didn't work for me was while I think the palette, I've said this before, I think the palette is much more harmonious. I still personally feel like that the characters are overly designed in many aspects. Like there are a lot of great gestures and contours and all that, but if I just kind of look at the silhouette of some of these characters, it still feels kind of messy in my opinion. But I'm a little bit more forgiving on that because I feel like, again, like I said, it feels more together in this than it did for me in HAZBIN Hotel. But one of my other criticisms lies back on the fundamentals where I feel like they held back on the animation much more than they did on HAZBIN Hotel, which worked in its favor. However, I kind of noticed between a couple shots that you can kind of tell the shift in different animator styles. Like it's essentially the same throughout, but some of the line quality and the arcing motion and timing was a bit off between some scenes.
Absolutely.
I didn't feel like it was as well managed as HAZBIN Hotel was, despite me not liking the animation so much in that. I guess overall, that's what I'm getting at here is like the passion is still clearly there. The passion was in HAZBIN Hotel, the talent was in there, as well as Helluva Boss. It has that passion and talent. My overall issues with both of these projects is that it just kind of lacks the management, the restraint, and overall focus to make this a more cohesive and visually appealing series.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's a really good point to bring up there. I agree. I think your criticisms are right. Are rightfully made. This is definitely driven towards a certain audience that definitely appeals to me. Like I am a part of this audience. I love everything that they're doing with it.
And that's fantastic.
Yeah, that's the exciting part. Art to me is seeing more content driven towards the adult audiences. Cartoons have always had kind of like this bias that it's meant for kids. And in the last couple decades, we've now seen, The Simpsons kind of drove a lot of adult audiences into cartoons. Family Guy, South Park, and this is its own beast, which is really, really refreshing. I'm just like with HAZBIN Hotel, Helluva Boss brings in, a new kind of style to the animation world that is really lacking right now. Adults want cartoons that are driven towards them, that are story based, not just pun based. Family Guy is great, South Park is great, but a lot of these ones just lack, the conceptual depth that this world that Vivian is giving us is giving out. I mean, this world is just extremely immersive, extremely adult content, and it's really interesting seeing it develop. I'm overly excited about it.
And I think that's fantastic too, because again, clearly, Vivian has her audience and it's appealing to them, and that's great. For someone who's not quite it's not quite my thing, even though I want it to be. If any of my criticism could go out there to help improve the show overall, to broaden the general appeal for everybody, I definitely feel like that this show could go places, or at least the team itself can produce a lot of great and unique content. The last positive that I kind of want to give, and technically it's more neutral in nature, my original argument is that you could take out the swearing and profanity from HAZBIN Hotel and the plot would be relatively the same. I feel like this is a more realized premise where if you try to do the same thing for Helluva Boss, unfortunately that will affect the overall plot, because the whole point of the imp's business is an assassination hitman business, and that in itself is adult in nature. So I feel like this is a more realized idea that has potential, in my opinion. So I think that's really good. That makes it a bit more flawless and definitely could go places.
Yeah, that's a good point. One thought I want to bring up too is just, we brought up a couple references before, but with Walt Disney and his first movie, which was Snow White, I always remember him saying that this isn't a cartoon, this is art. And the reason why he brought that up was because he wanted to escape the bias that people had back then towards cartoons. Because back then what they had were little shorts that were, quick puns, jokes and whatnot all over the place. And this kind of reminds me of that, oddly enough, where you're having, more story. There's jokes in it too, but it's definitely something that's very neat seeing a creator going against trends. I'm not saying that she's the next Walt Disney, but I am definitely saying that this group is going against the typical trends that the animation world has seen. And that is really neat and exciting to see because, who doesn't like seeing something new?
I definitely agree with you on that aspect. It is a more refreshing take because, like I said, when I first saw the style of both properties, I thought of Craig McCracken, or more specifically Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, that sort of thing, but based in hell and has an adult overall theme to it, which we don't often get. So again, like I said, I definitely think the passion and the ability to expand there is there. It just needs a little bit more refinement in the fundamentals, but that is just my opinion.
That's a good opinion. I think you're absolutely right on that. They definitely need to work on a few things, get their production under the other, but I'm excited to see where it ends up because I think they'll get it. They're going to find their pacing. They're going to create an amazing story. They've already created an amazing world, and we're just going to see this blow up. HAZBIN Hotel, Helluva Hotel. HAZBIN Hotel is
That's a
already
crossover episode.
right, exactly. But yeah, they've already reached millions and millions of views. I'm expecting it just to be the next, #1 trending thing for YouTube, and we'll just see where it goes from there. I'm stoked for it.
Yeah, not to get too topical here, but I do kind of hope it gets picked up by at least a studio, because as some of us know, with what YouTube's going through and what content creators are trying to like draw the line between kids content versus not made for kids, it's really going to be complicated for animators on YouTube to make any money off of their work. Whereas when you mentioned about Walt Disney saying it's art, not cartoon, unfortunately, a lot of people will still see this as kid-oriented, or at least make that mistake. And unfortunately, a lot of people's livelihoods might be on the line because of that ignorance. Again, I'm not trying to get too topical here, but I think you're right. I think with the large fan base, the social media presence that Vivian and her team has made through these cartoons will hopefully give her and the other talented artists other places of opportunity, or whatever it may be, to exercise those passions.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think you do bring up a really interesting point on that, and I'm just really excited to see where it goes from here.
I am too. I'm always trying to be supportive of other animators, whether if their content appeals to me or not, because I want people to feel inspired, as like Levi has felt inspired by this, as well as millions of other people.
Absolutely. I want to start working on a painting for it right now.
I'm excited to see that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really fun seeing this art style. I've got a lot of ideas on something to make for it.
And I'm sure it's going to look awesome. And I think that'll do it for our review of Helluva Boss, the pilot episode, which you can see on YouTube. I will make sure to provide a link to it if you haven't seen it, because I don't think we really spoiled the story. But anyway, you'll be able to view it for yourself for free anyway.
Subtle spoilers. Subtle.
I want to thank Levi for dropping on by remotely to share his opinions on that.
Anytime, Matt.
You mind tell them where they can find your work or follow you on social medias and all that?
Absolutely, Matt. Always a pleasure talking with you. You guys can all check me out on Facebook at Levi Craig Arts, Instagram at Levi Craig 75, and on YouTube at Watercolored Chaos.
And we'll have all that in the links description below. You heard our opinions, but now we want to hear yours. Let us know in the comment section below. Have you seen the pilot? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Share your thoughts. Join the conversation. And if you like reviews just like this, be sure to subscribe to my podcast channel. Ring that bell to be notified when new videos drop. Like this video, and if you want to support me directly, please go to my Patreon at patreon.com/Matt Sella. Consider donating. As low as $1 a month will help go towards my podcast channel, art, animation, and content made just for you. This is Matt Sella.
And Levi Craig.
Thanking you all for tuning in.
All right.